Before we dive in, viewer discretion is advised. This content is for entertainment purposes.
Tonight, the studio lights felt hotter than ever as one question changed everything, and no one was ready. What happens when Hollywood's most untouchable leading man walks onto daytime television and suddenly realizes he's not in control of the narrative anymore? The cameras at The View were already rolling when Brad Pitt stepped out from behind the curtain. The applause was automatic, almost reverent. He wore that effortless half-smile, the one that had sold movie tickets for decades. Casual blazer, relaxed posture, the kind of confidence that only comes from years of being called a legend. At the table sat the panel, Whoopi Goldberg leaning back with her knowing smirk, Joy Behar adjusting her cards, Sarah Haynes smiling politely, and then there was Sunny Hostin. Sunny wasn't smiling. Her eyes followed him as he took his seat. Calm, focused, analytical, the kind of look that said she wasn't here for charm. She was here for answers. Brad crossed one leg over the other, offering the audience a wave. "It's good to be here," he said, voice low and smooth. "Always nice to be somewhere that feels like a conversation." Sunny tilted her head slightly. "We love conversations," she replied evenly. "Especially honest ones." There was a flicker, subtle, but visible, across Brad's face. A quick tightening around the jaw before he smiled again. Whoopi jumped in first, easing the air. "You've got a new project coming out. Big buzz already. Tell us about it." Brad relaxed. This was familiar ground. He spoke about the film, about transformation, about storytelling. The audience leaned in. He was articulate, thoughtful. Applause came easily. But Sunny was listening differently. When there was a pause, just long enough, she leaned forward. "Brad," she began softly, almost gently. "You've spent decades shaping public perception through powerful roles. But lately, the conversation around you hasn't just been about movies." The studio shifted. You could feel it. Brad's fingers tightened together in his lap. "Well," he chuckled lightly, "I think when you've been around long enough, conversations evolve." Sunny didn't laugh. "They do," she agreed. "And sometimes they become uncomfortable." Joy glanced sideways. Whoopi's expression sharpened. Brad nodded slowly. "Uncomfortable conversations are part of life." "Then let's have one," Sunny said. The audience went silent. Brad inhaled through his nose. "Okay." Sunny's voice stayed measured. "There are viewers who feel that when celebrities are praised for vulnerability in interviews, it doesn't always align with how accountability plays out behind the scenes. Do you understand why some people feel that way?" It wasn't accusatory. It wasn't loud. It was precise. Brad shifted in his chair. "I think life is complicated. Relationships are complicated. And the public doesn't always see the full picture." Sunny held his gaze. "That's true. But the public also sees patterns." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Sarah jumped in gently. "I think what Sunny's asking is about growth. How do you respond to criticism?" Brad's smile thinned. "You grow. You reflect. You try to be better." Sunny nodded once. "And what does better look like to you?" There it was again, that faint tightening around his eyes. "Better," he said carefully, "means listening. Taking responsibility where necessary. And moving forward." Sunny didn't blink. "Taking responsibility publicly? Or privately?" The question landed like a dropped glass. Whoopi let out a low mm. Brad's composure wavered for half a second, just enough for the cameras to catch it. His tongue pressed against his cheek. He leaned back, buying time. "I don't think every private matter needs to be litigated in public," he said. Sunny's tone stayed calm. "But when your public image benefits from narratives of self-improvement, isn't the public part of that equation?" The audience gasped softly. Brad let out a short breath, not quite a laugh. "That's a strong take." "It's a fair one," Sunny replied. Joy jumped in, half joking, half serious. Sunny came prepared today. A ripple of nervous laughter. Brad looked toward Whoopi, almost as if searching for rescue. Whoopi folded her hands. "We ask tough questions here," she said plainly. And suddenly, the dynamic had shifted. Brad wasn't promoting a film anymore. He was defending a version of himself. He leaned forward now, elbows on knees. "Look," he began, voice firmer. "I've made mistakes. I've owned that. I've done the work. Therapy. Reflection. Changing habits. That's real. It's not PR." Sunny's eyes softened, but only slightly. "I'm glad you said that. Because many people watching have done their own work without platforms, without applause. They are wondering what accountability really means when you have influence. There was no hostility in her voice. Just clarity. Brad's jaw tightened again. So what are you asking me, Sunny? I'm asking, she said steadily, whether redemption should be self-declared or demonstrated. Silence. You could hear someone in the back row cough. Brad stared at her. For the first time since walking out, the movie star ease was gone. What remained was a man cornered by a question he couldn't charm his way out of. I don't declare redemption, he said slowly. I just try to live differently. Sunny nodded once. Then people will decide for themselves. It wasn't an attack. It was a verdict deferred. The tension was electric now. Social media producers backstage were already clipping the exchange. The control room was buzzing. Brad leaned back again, folding his arms this time, a subtle shift, but defensive. Sarah attempted to pivot. Your film actually deals with themes of forgiveness, right? Brad exhaled sharply through his nose. Yeah, it does. Sunny didn't look away. Art imitates life. He met her gaze again, and this time there was steel in it. Or maybe, he replied quietly, life imitates art. The audience reacted, a mix of impressed murmurs and uneasy silence. Joy blinked. Well, that just got philosophical. But no one was laughing anymore. The air felt heavier. Charged. Brad's voice dropped lower. I understand scrutiny. I signed up for it. But there's also a line between conversation and assumption. Sunny's reply was immediate. And there's a line between privacy and accountability. They were locked now, not shouting, not interrupting, just two adults in a calm but razor-sharp standoff. Whoopi finally leaned forward. This is why we have these discussions, she said gravely. Growth isn't comfortable. Brad nodded once, but his eyes never left Sunny. For a moment, neither of them spoke. And that silence said more than anything else had. The golden boy aura had cracked, not shattered, not destroyed, but fractured just enough for everyone watching to see that behind the charm, behind the rehearsed humility, there was something raw, defensive, human. And Sunny had pulled it into the light. The segment wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. Because what Brad said next would shift the energy from uncomfortable to unforgettable. The silence stretched just a second too long. In live television, a second can feel like an hour. Brad Pitt shifted in his chair, rolling his shoulders back as if physically preparing for what came next. The easy grin was gone now. In its place was something sharper, controlled, but simmering. You know, he began slowly, voice lower than before. There's something interesting about the word accountability. It's used a lot these days. Sometimes as a bridge. Sometimes as a weapon. A soft ripple moved through the audience. Across the table, Sunny Hostin didn't react emotionally. She simply watched him, analytical, steady. As a weapon, she repeated, tone even. Brad nodded. Yeah, because sometimes it's less about growth and more about public punishment. And I think we have to be careful about confusing the two. Whoopi Goldberg leaned forward slightly, sensing the temperature rising. Joy Behar glanced between them like she was watching a tennis match. Sarah Haynes shifted in her seat, fingers lightly gripping her notes. Sunny clasped her hands on the table. Accountability isn't punishment, she said calmly. It's acknowledgement. It's transparency. Brad let out a short breath. Not quite frustration, not quite disbelief. Transparency about what, exactly? About harm, Sunny replied. There it was again. Not loud, not dramatic, just precise. The word hung in the air like smoke. Brad's jaw flexed. You're speaking in general terms, he said. But you're implying something specific. Sunny didn't blink. Viewers are capable of drawing their own conclusions. A murmur swept through the crowd, louder this time. Brad leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees again. His voice was steady, but the tension underneath was unmistakable. I've never claimed to be perfect, he said. I've been open about struggles. I've talked about mistakes. I've taken steps to change. That's real. Sunny nodded once. Growth is real. But so are consequences. Joy interjected, trying to diffuse. I think what people want to know is, how do you reconcile being celebrated publicly while navigating personal controversy privately? Brad looked at Joy gratefully for half a second, an opening. You reconcile it by doing the work when no one's watching, he said. By focusing on your family. By focusing on healing. Sunny's eyes sharpened at that word. Healing for whom? She asked. The audience audibly reacted, a collective inhale. Brad blinked, taken slightly off guard. Healing for everyone involved. And does everyone agree they've healed? Sunny pressed gently. The control room must have been buzzing. Social feeds were likely exploding in real time. Brad straightened up. His posture was no longer relaxed. It was guarded. I'm not going to speak for other people's experiences, he said carefully. That wouldn't be fair. Sunny nodded. That's understandable. But when you speak about redemption in interviews, it can feel like you are. The tension was no longer subtle. It was visible in the tightness of Brad's smile, in the stillness of Sunny's hands. Whoopi stepped in. Let's remember, she said gravely. We're talking about human beings, not headlines. Brad exhaled, grateful for the lifeline. Exactly. Human beings. Complicated, flawed human beings. Sunny tilted her head slightly. Complicated doesn't cancel impact. A low "oh" rose from somewhere in the audience before quickly fading. Brad's composure cracked just slightly. I'm not trying to cancel impact, he said, the first edge creeping into his voice. But there's a narrative out there that reduces years of life to a few simplified talking points. And is that narrative inaccurate? Sunny asked. It's incomplete, Brad shot back. The shift was immediate. This wasn't promotional banter anymore. It was a philosophical duel. Sawa attempted another pivot. Your new film deals with a character confronting his past, right? Was that personal for you? Brad paused. This time, the silence wasn't defensive, it was reflective. Yeah, he admitted quietly. It was. The audience softened a little. I think, he continued, choosing his words carefully, we all reach moments where we have to sit with who we've been. And it's not comfortable. It's ugly sometimes. But you don't get to rewrite it. You just try to do better moving forward. Sunny's expression shifted, not softer, but more contemplative. And do you think doing better requires public acknowledgement of specifics? She asked. Brad looked at her directly. Do you think it requires public dissection? The energy spiked again. Sunny held her ground. When you are a public figure with influence, yes, sometimes it does. Brad leaned back, folding his arms again. I disagree. The word was calm. Firm. Joy's eyebrows lifted. Oh boy. Whoopi crossed her arms too, mirroring the posture unconsciously. Disagreement is healthy, she said. But let's unpack it. Brad nodded once. I believe accountability is personal. It's about direct conversations. Apologies where they belong. Change where it's needed. Not performing remorse for strangers. Sunny didn't flinch. But when strangers helped build your platform, aren't they part of the equation? The audience gasped again. Brad's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in intensity. My platform was built on work, he said evenly. On films. On collaboration. On art. And public admiration, Sunny added. He paused. Yes, he admitted. So when that admiration is shaken, she continued, it's natural for people to ask questions. Brad leaned forward again, voice firmer. And I'm here answering them. The temperature in the room rose another degree. Sunny's tone remained almost disarmingly calm. You're answering broadly. A beat. Brad's lips pressed together. For a moment, it looked like he might say something sharper, something he couldn't take back. Instead, he inhaled slowly. What specifics would satisfy you? He asked quietly. It wasn't sarcastic. It was direct. The studio went completely silent. Sunny considered him for a moment. I'm not here to be satisfied, she said. I'm here to represent viewers who feel unheard. That landed. Brad blinked, not defensive now, but processing. And do they feel unheard by me? He asked. Some do, Sunny replied. The vulnerability in that exchange shifted the energy again, from combative to exposed. Brad's voice softened slightly. Then I'm listening. For the first time since the confrontation began, Sunny nodded in genuine acknowledgement. Listening is the beginning, she said. The audience, unsure whether to applaud or stay silent, did neither. Whoopi leaned in once more. This, she said slowly, is what real conversation looks like. It's uncomfortable. It's laid. Brad rubbed his hands together briefly, grounding himself. I don't expect everyone to understand my journey, he said. But I'm not running from it. Sunny met his gaze. Then stay in the conversation. Another charged silence. Backstage producers were likely signaling to wrap soon, but no one at the table moved. No one wanted to blink first, because something deeper had cracked open. This wasn't about scandal anymore. It was about power. Narrative. Control. And for the first time in a very long career, Brad Pitt wasn't dictating the story. He was sitting inside it. And as the cameras zoomed slightly closer, capturing every micro-expression, every tightening jaw, every thoughtful pause, it became clear. This face-off was no longer awkward. It was personal. And it was far from over. The applause sign flickered uncertainly, but no one in the audience moved. The air inside the View studio felt heavier now, not explosive, not chaotic, just thick with something unresolved. Brad Pitt sat still, elbows resting on his knees again, fingers loosely intertwined. The posture of a man trying to ground himself. Across from him, Sunny Hostin remained composed, but the intensity in her eyes hadn't faded. Whoopi cleared her throat softly. "Let's take a breath," Whoopi Goldberg said. "Because this is laid." Brad nodded, but his gaze never fully left Sunny. Sunny leaned back slightly this time, giving space, but not retreating. "Brad," she said calmly, "you mentioned not performing remorse for strangers. I understand that. But when your life plays out in public, people feel connected to it." Brad tilted his head. Connected or entitled? A subtle stir moved through the audience. Joy's eyebrows shot up. "Oh, that's a word choice." Joy Behar tried to soften it with a half-smile, but even she sensed the temperature shift. Sunny didn't flinch. "I don't think empathy equals entitlement." Brad's jaw tightened briefly. "And I don't think curiosity equals ownership." There it was, sharper now. Sarah jumped in gently. "I think what viewers struggle with is the contrast. The vulnerability in interviews versus the silence in specifics." Sarah Haynes spoke carefully, as if stepping between two currents. Brad exhaled slowly. "Silence isn't avoidance," he said. "Sometimes it's protection." "Protection of whom?" Sunny asked. The repetition of that structure, precise, surgical, was intentional. Brad paused longer this time. "Of people who didn't choose this spotlight," he replied. Sunny nodded once. "That's fair." The acknowledgement softened the room by a fraction. "But," she continued gently, "when narratives shift and public sympathy tilts, it can feel like one voice dominates." Brad leaned back again, folding his arms, defensive posture returning like muscle memory. "Are you suggesting I control public sympathy?" "I'm suggesting influence matters," Sunny said. Brad's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in calculation. "Influence cuts both ways," he replied. "Media narratives shape perception too." That landed heavier than anything so far. Whoopi leaned in, sensing the philosophical pivot. "You're saying the press amplifies selectively." "I'm saying," Brad replied steadily, "that complexity gets flattened." Joy let out a low whistle. "This is not your typical promo tour." The audience gave a nervous chuckle, tension relief, but brief. Sunny clasped her hands again. "Complexity is real," she said. "But so is impact. When people see growth framed as a personal triumph story, it can overshadow unresolved pain." Brad's lips parted slightly, as if he had prepared for every angle except that one. "You think I'm framing myself as triumphant?" he asked quietly. "I think," Sunny said carefully, "that redemption arcs are powerful. Especially in Hollywood." The word Hollywood hung there like a mirror. Brad's voice lowered. "You think this is scripted?" "No," Sunny said. "I think it's human. But human stories aren't one-sided." Silence again. Brad ran a hand along his jaw, eyes briefly scanning the audience. For the first time, there was something unmistakable in his expression: fatigue. "I don't wake up thinking about redemption arcs," he said softly. "I wake up thinking about being better than I was yesterday." That vulnerability shifted something in the room. Sarah nodded gently. "That's relatable." Sunny studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "Then maybe the disconnect isn't about your effort," she said. "Maybe it's about visibility." Brad looked up sharply. "Visibility of what?" "Of accountability," she replied. He let out a breath, not frustration, but weariness. "What would that look like to you, Sunny?" "A press conference. A statement drafted by lawyers." The edge was back, subtle, but present. Sunny didn't rise to it. "It would look like clarity. And clarity satisfies everyone." Brad countered. "No," she admitted. "But silence satisfies almost no one." That hit differently. The audience murmured, divided now. Some nodded at Sunny's reasoning. Others leaned toward Brad's quiet defensiveness. Whoopi stepped in again. "Let me ask this," she said. "Do you feel misunderstood?" Brad didn't hesitate this time. "Yes." The honesty of it cut through the tension. Sunny's expression shifted, not softer, but more empathetic. By the public, she asked. By the simplicity of the narrative, he replied. People reduce complicated relationships to heroes and villains. Real life isn't that clean. Joy nodded slowly. It rarely is. Sunny leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. But when you're perceived as the hero in that reduction, do you question it? The room went still again. Brad blinked. That one landed. He opened his mouth, then closed it. A flicker of internal debate crossed his face. Yes, he said finally. I do. There was no defensiveness in it. Just truth. Sunny held his gaze. And what do you do with that discomfort? Brad's voice dropped to almost a whisper. I sit with it. A long pause. And? Sunny pressed gently. And I try not to let ego answer for me. The audience reacted, softer this time, contemplative rather than shocked. Whoopi gave a slow nod. That's growth. Sunny's voice was measured. Growth is powerful. But so is transparency. Brad's composure wavered again, not cracking, but bending. You keep coming back to that, he said quietly. Because viewers keep coming back to it, she replied. The eye contact between them held, intense, unbroken. This wasn't anger anymore. It was philosophy colliding with perception. Brad leaned forward once more, forearms on his knees, shoulders squared. I won't perform regret, he said calmly. But I won't deny mistakes either. I've owned what's mine. Sunny nodded. And what isn't yours? He met her gaze evenly. Isn't mine to claim. The subtle firmness in his tone signaled a boundary. The audience felt it. Joy shifted in her seat. This feels like a mediation session. A few scattered laughs broke the tension. But the underlying current remained. Because this wasn't just about one man's reputation. It was about how power interacts with pain. How influence shapes empathy. How silence and speech can both be interpreted as strategy. Sunny leaned back once more, studying him. Do you believe the public deserves the full story? She asked. Brad's answer came slower this time. I believe the people involved deserve peace. The words were calm. Final. And for the first time, Sunny didn't immediately counter. She simply nodded. But the silence that followed wasn't resolution. It was the calm before something deeper, something more personal, surfaced. Because beneath the philosophical debate about accountability and influence, there was something unspoken. And everyone in that studio could feel it rising. The silence after his last sentence didn't feel accidental. I believe the people involved deserve peace. The words lingered in the studio like a closing argument, calm, controlled, almost final. But Sunny Hostin wasn't finished. She leaned forward slowly, hands resting lightly on the table, her voice softer now, but somehow heavier. Peace, she repeated. Sometimes peace requires acknowledgement before it arrives. Across from her, Brad Pitt didn't move. His expression had shifted from guarded to resolute. Not angry. Not defensive. Resolved. Acknowledgement has happened, he said quietly. In what form? Sunny asked. There was no accusation in her tone now. Just precision. Brad inhaled slowly. In conversations that weren't televised. The audience stirred again, divided murmurs, whispers layered over the hum of studio lights. Whoopi Goldberg leaned back in her chair, watching carefully. Joy Behar had stopped shuffling her cards entirely. Sarah Haynes looked between them with visible concern. Sunny nodded once. I respect private conversations, she said. But public narratives still have impact. Brad's eyes held steady. So does public pressure. A subtle shift. Not louder, but firmer. Sunny tilted her head. Pressure can create change. And it can also distort it, Brad replied. The audience reacted again, a few scattered claps quickly silenced by the tension. Sunny didn't back down. Do you believe public accountability is distortion? I believe, Brad said slowly, choosing every word, that public accountability often becomes public spectacle. The word spectacle hung there. Whoopi interjected gently. And this isn't. Brad gave a faint, knowing smile. This is conversation. Sunny's lips pressed together slightly. Conversation has consequences. Brad leaned forward again, elbows planted firmly now. Sunny, he said, using her name deliberately. Do you believe growth only counts if it's announced? The directness of it shifted the power dynamic again. Sunny met his gaze without hesitation. No, but I believe influence carries responsibility. And I'm not denying that, he replied quickly. I'm questioning the format. Joy finally broke in, tension in her voice. This feels like two different definitions of accountability. Maybe it is, Sunny replied. Brad nodded. Then maybe that's the real issue. A beat. For a moment, the sharpness faded into something almost reflective. Sarah leaned in gently. Brad, can I ask you something more personal? He nodded cautiously. When you hear criticism, the hard kind, what's your first reaction? Defensiveness? Guilt? Reflection? The question disarmed the room. Brad looked down briefly at his hands. Honest answer, he said. Yes, Sarah replied softly. Defensiveness, he admitted. The audience exhaled collectively, not in shock, but in recognition. Because, he continued, no one likes to feel reduced to their worst moments. Sunny's expression shifted, just slightly. I don't think anyone here is reducing you, she said carefully. Brad looked up. It can feel that way. That word again. Feel. Sunny leaned back this time. Feelings are valid, she said. But so are facts. Brad's jaw tightened. Facts require context. And context requires transparency, she responded smoothly. There it was again, the loop. Accountability. Transparency. Context. The debate had circled back, but it felt different now. Less combative. More exposed. Whoopi spoke slowly. What I'm hearing is that both of you agree growth matters. You just disagree on how it should look. Brad nodded once. Sunny didn't object. But, Whoopi continued, growth without discomfort isn't real. The words landed squarely in the center of the table. Brad leaned back, eyes briefly scanning the studio audience, faces watching him, judging him, analyzing him. Discomfort isn't new to me, he said quietly. Sunny's voice softened a degree. Then maybe the discomfort isn't the problem. Brad met her eyes. Maybe it's the expectation, he replied. Expectation of what? She asked. Of perfection after confession, he said. That line shifted the room. Joy let out a low hum. That's interesting. Sunny considered it carefully. I don't expect perfection, she said. I expect clarity. Brad exhaled slowly. Clarity isn't always possible when multiple lives are intertwined. The audience fell silent again. Sunny's next words came slower, more deliberate. Then maybe, she said, the public conversation should reflect that complexity instead of avoiding it. Brad's composure cracked just slightly, not with anger, but with frustration layered under restraint. I haven't avoided it, he said. I've addressed what's mine. And avoided what isn't, she asked gently. The air snapped tight again. Brad held her gaze for a long second. I won't speak for others, he said firmly. And I won't ignore viewers, Sunny replied. The stalemate was clear now. Not explosive. Not chaotic. But immovable. Whoopi glanced toward the producers off camera, likely signaling they were running long. But no one dared cut it short. Because something real was unfolding. Brad's voice lowered, losing the sharpness it carried moments earlier. You know what's hardest about all of this? He asked quietly. The room leaned in. It's that no answer feels sufficient, he said. If I speak broadly, it's vague. If I stay private, it's avoidance. If I express regret, it's performance. If I stay quiet, it's indifference. His honesty shifted the energy again. Sunny's eyes softened, just enough to show she was listening differently now. That's the cost of influence, she said gently. Brad gave a faint, almost tired smile. Then it's a high cost. Neither of them blinked. The tension had evolved from confrontation to something more complex, mutual acknowledgement of a system neither fully controlled. Joy finally broke the silence with an attempt at levity. Well, this is definitely not the press junket I expected. A few scattered laughs, but the weight remained. Sunny's final words in that moment were quiet. Growth isn't a press strategy, she said. It's a process. Brad nodded once. And process takes time. The eye contact held one beat longer than comfortable. Not enemies. Not allies. Just two perspectives refusing to collapse into one another. As the cameras slowly widened the shot and the audience shifted uneasily in their seats, it was clear that this wasn't going to end with a neat bow. Because what had started as an awkward promo interview had turned into something far more raw. And as the producers prepared to cut to commercial, one question lingered heavier than all the rest. Had this conversation brought clarity? Or had it just exposed how fractured the narrative truly was? The cameras pulled back. The red light dimmed. But the tension didn't. For a split second after the segment officially wrapped on The View, no one moved. The applause sign blinked insistently, urging the audience to clap, and they did. But it wasn't the thunderous, celebratory applause that usually follows a major Hollywood guest. It was uncertain. Measured. Brad Pitt stood first. He smoothed his blazer, jaw set but composed. He leaned across the table and shook hands, first with Whoopi Goldberg, who gave him a long, knowing look. Then Joy Behar, who squeezed his hand as if to say, that was something. Sarah Haynes offered a gentle smile. Then he turned to Sunny Hostin. The audience leaned forward instinctively. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Sunny stood. Calm. Composed. No hostility in her posture, just presence. Brad extended his hand. She took it. The handshake lasted a fraction longer than the others. Not aggressive. Not overly warm. Intentional. Thank you for the conversation, Sunny said quietly, audible only because the studio mics were still hot. Brad nodded. I meant what I said. I'm listening. She held his gaze for half a second longer. I hope so, she replied. And then he stepped away. As he walked off stage, the applause followed him, louder now, but divided. Some clapped out of loyalty. Some out of admiration for how he handled pressure. Others clapped because it felt like the right thing to do when a movie star exits the room. But backstage was different. Producers were already replaying clips. The phrase public spectacle was being isolated. Clarity requires transparency was being cued for social media. Within minutes, the exchange was cut into bite-sized segments. Online, it detonated. Some viewers praised Sunny for asking the questions others were afraid to voice. They called it fearless. Necessary. A masterclass in calm accountability. Others defended Brad, arguing he had been cornered. That he was being pushed to perform remorse for an audience that would never be satisfied. They called it unfair. Exploitative. Comment sections flooded. Clips went viral. Debate panels on other networks dissected the exchange frame by frame. Body language experts analyzed Brad's folded arms. Communication coaches praised Sunny's composure. Headlines framed it as everything from awkward tension to philosophical showdown. But beneath the noise, something quieter lingered. In the hours after the episode aired, neither of them posted anything. No defensive tweets. No clarifying statements. No PR-crafted captions. Just silence. And that silence spoke volumes. Because what had unfolded wasn't a scandal. It wasn't a shouting match. It was something more unsettling. It was two conflicting definitions of accountability colliding in real time, without resolution. For Brad, growth was personal. Private. Measured in conversations unseen. For Sunny, influence demanded visibility. Clarity. Acknowledgement that extended beyond closed doors. Neither position fully defeated the other. And that's why the moment stuck. Days later, interviews about Brad's film kept circling back to the same topic. What did you mean by public spectacle? Do you feel misunderstood? Was Sunny Hostin right? He answered carefully each time. Calmly. Without adding fuel. Meanwhile, viewers rewatched the exchange again and again, not for drama, but for nuance. For the micro-expressions. The pauses. The breaths between words. Some said it humanized him. Others said it exposed him. But almost everyone agreed on one thing. It was real. In a media world dominated by rehearsed answers and predictable banter, this felt unscripted. Uncomfortable. Honest. And maybe that's why it resonated. Because there was no knockout punch. No viral meltdown. Just two adults refusing to oversimplify a complicated conversation. In the weeks that followed, think pieces continued to appear. Podcasts debated whether public figures owe the public their full story. Commentators argued about the ethics of accountability in celebrity culture. And somewhere inside that noise, one question kept echoing. When does growth become visible enough? The studio audience who had been there that day would later describe the atmosphere as electric. Not because anyone yelled. Not because anyone stormed off. But because you could feel the shift. The shift from charm to challenge. From image to introspection. From performance to pressure. And in that shift, something cracked open. Not just for Brad, not just for Sunny, but for everyone watching. Because accountability isn't cinematic. It's messy. It doesn't fit neatly into a 7-minute segment. It doesn't resolve before commercial break. As the clip continues to circulate, viewers are still divided. Was Brad unfairly cornered? Or was Sunny simply doing her job? Now it's your turn. Did Brad handle the pressure with honesty? Or did he avoid the clarity Sunny was pushing for? Was this a necessary conversation about influence and responsibility? or an example of public expectation going too far?